Hello and welcome to A Grain of Sanderson, a podcast where we are foolishly attempting to read all of Brandon Sanderson's works in publication order. I am joined by Taylor Lane.
Hello.
And Jack McLaughlan.
Hello.
And today we have finished reading all of Alcatraz versus the Shattered Lens, Book 4 of the Alcatraz versus the Evil Librarian series.
Getting close to the end. Very happy that we got to read a fun children's book instead of a monster of a bad fantasy novel that Wheel of Time was.
Yeah. Or like even a fantasy novel that we were broadly pretty high on of like, I'm so glad we're reading this instead of The Way of Kings.
Yeah.
Of just 3 in a row like that was rough.
I'll always love Way of Kings, but going Gathering Storm, Way of Kings, Towers of Midnight, that was a busy 3 months of reading.
That was pretty taxing.
And I think our next couple books are going to be significantly shorter and easier to consume.
Yeah, I think the first one we'll have a challenge with is Memory of Light. And that's in July.
Yeah. You know, years from now.
The Shattered Lens is the 4th book in the series, and there's 5 books in the main series. And then there's Bastille versus the Evil Librarians as like a 6th book. So this is kind of the penultimate book of the series.
Yes, and I fucking called the Library of Congress. Also, if you're wondering why we sound a little like stilted, listeners, it's because we are re-recording the intro to this. Sorry.
Yeah. We got to the end of the intro and realized we had no plan. And had to go back.
We are professionals. That's all you have to say. But yeah, no, I mean, this book ended it ended like a penultimate book. It ended with them being like, yep, it's now Alcatraz teaming up with his mom. I'm still calling it's going to be kind of a Darth Vader-y style ending. They're going to go to the Highbrary, aka the Library of Congress, which is a front for a massive set of secret tunnels underground that is like the librarian's main HQ. We finally got the like Alcatraz is like the hero of the Free Kingdoms. Like I think the war is just over. That's the, or at least the like there's still kind of a Cold War going on, but like the active like librarians invading Free Kingdoms, that's just over. That was defeated in a really cool moment we'll get to.
Yeah.
Do we want to do our one sentences and then do the full summary?
Yeah.
My one sentence was maybe the librarians have a point, the book.
Yeah.
That's fair.
Shasta Smedry was making some really good points. It was convincing me. I was like, okay.
No, that's totally fair. I mean, I have thoughts about the conversation between Shasta and Alcatraz, but we'll get there. Taylor, what's yours?
Mine is that I'm sad that we are not reading the next book sooner.
Yeah.
I want to.
It's a year
I want to
now.
get to it. This worked as like a penultimate book. I'm like, I feel the momentum. I'm ready for the next one.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, again, let's check the exact date that we'll be reading it. Alcatraz versus the Dark Talent. August 2026. So we have like a full year and a half before we read the next one.
Sanderson, why did you do this?
Yeah. I mean, rip to the Alcatraz fans who don't care about the Cosmere and like had to wait 2007 all the way up to 2022 having to wait for a conclusion.
Well, I will say like the last line of this book is it happens in the next book, I promise. No lies this time. Maybe someday I'll actually write that book.
Yeah.
And I wrote if I were a reader, I would be so fucking pissed. Like if the last book hadn't come out. And I was maybe he wrote that because he had like a writing schedule and he was like, I'm not getting around to the Dark Talent for a hot minute.
He was just like he was picking up all of his like bigger Cosmere stuff and he was like, no promises.
It's worth noting that like on our show it's a year and a half, but in real time it takes 6 years between Shattered Lens and the Dark Talent. So the Dark Talent is 2016 and I mean, hold on, let's just see.
We're in like the 2011s-ish.
We just finished 2010 and we're about to enter 2011. 27 different things before we get to the Dark Talent. Goddamn.
Jesus.
Anyway. Stay tuned, listeners. My one sentence summary is Sanderson finally got me. Told an honest to God joke that got me to unironically slap my fucking knee. It was really good. We've mentioned on pod before. I'll just spoil the joke because it's not really going to come up in the summary otherwise. We've talked many times about how batshit insane the covers to these books are in their original publication. They're very of their era, sort of like 2000s era, even like early 90s with Animorphs, were like a weird Photoshop job of like putting like a real human face into like a weird distorted science fictional background. And we've talked about how much I actually genuinely really like the Scrivener's Bones cover, where it's Alcatraz like riding the glass dragon in space. And they do a really good joke in this book of like they will just skip around chapters, where there will be it'll be like chapter 8, and then it'll be chapter 44, and then Alcatraz will mention all the exciting things that they did in between those chapters that they didn't include. And one of the jokes is Kaz being like, I personally liked when we went to space, and Bastille goes, we should have done that in the second book, and that way that cover would have made sense. Which really got me. I was just so not prepared for it.
It's also on page 69 if you wanted to find it.
Oh, incredible.
Oh my god. I don't think I caught that like at first, and then like went and reread it.
No, I cackled, and when you said that one joke made you laugh, I immediately was like, I wonder if it's the joke about the covers, because that made me laugh so hard.
5-star joke. I am unfortunately susceptible to meta jokes just like everyone else. All right, should we do our big summary?
Yeah. Alcatraz versus the Shattered Lens is book 4 in the Alcatraz versus the Evil Librarian series. In the penultimate book in the series, Alcatraz finally reveals what he is most famous for, saving Tuki Tuki and by extension all Mokia from falling to the librarians. Our book begins in the city of Nahala, where Alcatraz spent the last book. Alcatraz finds out that Tuki Tuki is going to fall and wants the Knights of Crystalia to help. However, the Knights are not able to be involved with politics, as their only job is to protect the Smedries and other noble families. So Alcatraz, Bastille, Kaz, Alcatraz's uncle, and a new cousin, 8-year-old 80, travel to Tuki Tuki to force the Knights of Crystalia to follow after them and help defend the city. The crew arrives outside of Tuki Tuki and notices the librarian camp is surrounded by giant robots. At nightfall, Alcatraz and the crew sneak and then fight their way into Tuki Tuki while only speaking lines from Hamlet. In the city, they find the Queen, Bastille's sister, and the King, who is pretending he is a regular general so the Knights of Crystalia don't take him away from the city to protect him. They find out that the librarians are tunneling into the city under the protective dome and also using their giant robots to throw rocks to crack the dome from above. Alcatraz successfully contacts Grandpa Smedry, who shows the Knights that Alcatraz is in Tuki Tuki and therefore successfully mobilizes the forces to come to their aid by dawn. In a tunneling fight with the librarians, both the Queen and the King fall into comas from the librarians' coma-inducing weapons, making Alcatraz the highest-ranked person in the city, and therefore making Alcatraz king of Mokia for the day. Also importantly, Alcatraz's mother, Shasta Smedry, is in the team with the librarians and gets captured. Now as king, Alcatraz comes up with a plan to take down the robots. The fastest soldiers in the city, along with Kaz and Bastille, waited for more librarians to tunnel in and then use their own tunnel to get out of the city. Once out, the 6 runners made their way to the 6 giant robots and used teddy bear grenades that only destroy non-living things to take out the legs of the robots and topple them. In the fight, Bastille fell to the librarians and was put into a coma. Feeling defeated, Alcatraz went to find his mother. They spoke about Alcatraz's new insights on the talents, and Shasta revealed that she is working against Alcatraz's father because she knew the danger that the Smedry talents posed. With Alcatraz's own experience with his talent, he realized that his mother was right, and if his father succeeded in giving everyone in the world Smedry talents, it would likely end the same way that the old people of Incarna ended, in total annihilation. After speaking to his mother, Alcatraz gets captured by a strike team of librarians. Notably, he finds that while he is captured in the net, his talent doesn't work for him. He thinks this is because the talent has sentience and was offended that Alcatraz sided with his mother. At the same moment, Grandpa Smedry shows up with the Knights of Crystalia. Alcatraz meets back up with his family, and as they were flying away, decides instead to command the ship to fly into librarian territory to save Bastille's body. The plan goes wrong, and they get overwhelmed by librarians. Alcatraz, overcome with grief over a failing Bastille and the city, lets his talent loose on the soldiers coming for them. And it looked like a black snake emerging from him to cause destruction. Giant cracks formed in the earth, swallowing up the librarians in the immediate vicinity. While it temporarily helps, Alcatraz understands that this is not enough to stop all of the librarians. Using his bestower's lens, a lens that allows someone to give something of themselves to someone else, Alcatraz finds the flesh stone on the back of Bastille's neck that connects her to the rest of the Knights of Crystallia, and use the combinations of the magics to give away his talents to the entirety of the Knights of Crystallia in one large burst. That burst broke everything. When Alcatraz comes to, Grandpa Smedry tells him that 1. The librarians retreated and he saved Mokia. 2. Bastille is still not awake from the librarian-induced coma. And 3. All of the Smedry talents are gone.
What a place to end as well. I know we said like this is a real cliffhanger of a book setting up for the final book sort of ending, but like just reiterating all of that of like we have to go infiltrate the Library of Congress and all the Smedry talents are gone. Fucking awesome.
Yeah. And it's fun because it feels like the book is simultaneously like a really happy ending and also a tragic one. Like personally tragic, globally happy because like the war's over. Mm-hmm. Like the Free Kingdomers fended off the librarians because of Alcatraz. Like the librarians are no longer invading the Free Kingdoms, at least for like the time being, and it's like all is good, like really, really good ending. I was actually surprised with how conclusively like, oh no, the war is over. Mm-hmm. This book was. Yeah. But it's just Alcatraz personally is left with like, but my life's kind of fucked and I gotta go deal with that now.
Yeah, Alcatraz Smedry, firm supporter of direct action.
Yeah.
Honestly, I think the thing that's beating him up the most is that Bastille's not awake. To be honest, I don't know that.
God, their whole relationship is so cute in this one. The one where like Bastille fully like confesses and is like, "I like you, dumbass." Basically, it's so cute. God. It was so happy. Cute that I even was like fine with Alcatraz saying like a little misogynistic comment because it's like he's a little 13-year-old boy. Of course, he's gonna say, "I don't understand women."
Yeah.
There's also him being like, let's go catch a movie, and Bastille's just like,
what's a movie?
Why do we need to catch one?
Why do we need to catch a movie? And Alcatraz just backs the fuck off. He's like, nope.
God, what do Hushlanders do on dates? I'm sure we'll find out eventually.
Well, Hushlanders are the catch a movie.
Oh, right. Yep, sorry. You know what I meant. The Free Kingdomers. Yeah. What does a Free Kingdomer date look like? And this is the thing where, like, we'll get into this a little bit later in sort of our more broad issues with it, but this is the thing that I think Alcatraz is sort of missing, is, like, Percy Jackson is good enough to see what to show us what, like, a Greek god Camp Half-Blood date looks like, and that's the sauce of those books, of, like, yeah, we get all this great action, but also we get the slice of life shit. Anyway.
Well, we saw a date last book when they went to get ice cream.
Yes.
Yeah, no, I don't think Sanderson realized that, like, Bastille is it. Like you've got two main characters, bestie. Alcatraz is not enough on his own. You've got to stop breaking up Bastille and Alcatraz because that's the sauce. Like,
that's the entire.
Leave them together.
Yeah, you really need them together because that's the thing that really is so striking to me. Of these characters are so good together, and I had a point, but I'm losing it. God damn it! Keep talking.
I was gonna say that I think that's why the Scrivener's Bones was so strong, and why the last two books were weaker.
Yeah,
it's because the climax in that book was Alcatraz and Bastille together.
Yeah, that's the thing of these characters are so unbelievably strong together, and when you remove them, it's not like you were removing a side character, you're removing one of your central two things. And it's like, it's the oldest trick in the book of, like, you have a funny man and a straight man, and, like, Alcatraz is the funny character and Bastille is the straight man in all of the interactions.
No, I'd argue they take turns because they're the funny man and the straight man.
Yeah, but that is a great way to put it, of, like, much more succinct than what I was going to get into, of, like, they do take turns.
Because Bastille will say something absolutely bonkers about how the Free Kingdoms work, and then Alcatraz is the one to be like, okay.
Yeah, and then Alcatraz is an idiot 13-year-old boy, and then Bastille is a responsible knight of Crystallia, and like, yeah, as you said, they take turns. It's really cute. That's probably the strongest bit of writing throughout this whole thing is their relationship, and he keeps shooting himself in the foot by having Bastille be like a damsel in distress. And
I know.
like you are missing one of your two key pillars. Oh well.
He clearly thinks that Alcatraz can hold the book up on his own, and I honestly don't think that Alcatraz is enough. I think
I'm worried this is what's going to happen whenever we get the Wit is the main character book.
Yeah. We'll get to the books that are written by Hoyd eventually, but that's the thing of that's the main problem I have with those books is they're all written in Alcatraz's voice. We'll get to that in 2028.
Later.
Oh my god.
See y'all in 3.5 years.
Yeah. But going into our list of topics, Taylor, you said some things were retconned? Question mark?
Yeah, I was reading this and I thought that like some things were like strange. Did they ever say in the other books that like the Knights of Crystallia weren't like a force,
like a political force?
Yeah, like I thought that I was like I did not understand that from other books. That seems not true.
That was sort of new.
Yeah.
The other books were the ones to be like, oh yeah, the Knights, they protect royalty, they protect Smedries, all that stuff. They definitely made that clear in the other books. But this book kind of dropped what felt like for the plot to work, dropped the Knights of Crystallia do not actively engage in the war except when it is protecting monarchs.
Yeah, that's one of the ones that was sort of interesting to me because there's something else new in here of the Smedries as kind of post-racial. As in, they're all, like, Alcatraz is posited as having Mokian blood in this book. And not just, like, Mokian cousins, but, like, his great-grandfather, or maybe great-great-grandfather was Mokian. That sort of thing. Which, one, is interesting, but it's also sort of like, I wish that was explored a little bit more. But two, because the Smedries are post-racial and are kind of citizens of every nation, there is a, like, claim being made that that they are politically unaligned, which sure, since they're citizens of every nation, I can believe that the Smedries have to be politically unaligned and just like take action where they decide that they need to. But the Knights of Crystallia, that doesn't make sense because like, again, they are royal bodyguards, not just for the Smedries. That is an inherently political goal.
Yeah.
Yeah. I also feel like the talent having like black tentacles was like something that probably should have been mentioned in book 2. Maybe it was. But I feel like I was like, this seems...
I think this is part of a new thing. I think this is related to, like, the Smedry talents becoming more alive as Alcatraz...
More erratic.
Yeah. I think it's related to, like, in 3, he describes it as, like, external to himself at one point. And I think it's something like that.
Oh, you think it grew from one book to the
Exactly.
other?
I think it grew. And that's sort of the logical progression.
I think, yeah, because we got with the talents being alive, we got a lot of like the talent is sentient, the talent wants to break, and a big conflict. We'll get to the conversation with his mom eventually, but like that Alcatraz thinking, oh, maybe the talents are a bad thing, basically caused his talent to rebel, and that's kind of what that ending was. Kind of like, what do you mean I'm a bad thing? Let me break more, please.
Yeah.
Also, randomly halfway through the book, he's like, my
Oculators lenses?
My oculators lenses are actually called primary lenses, and then never uses primary lenses after that one chapter.
Yeah,
I was like,
sometimes called primary lenses. Yeah, sometimes doing a lot of work there.
I was like, why are we randomly retconning this? Like, this seems odd.
This is so Sanderson in a nutshell of like, by the way, it's important to me that you, the reader, know this, but I'm never going to use it further in the book. Of like, there's world building where like the narrator communicates this to the audience, but it never really becomes relevant in the text. That's all over the Cosmere.
That's fair. I want to know why, like, were the beta readers like confused? I feel like it's more confusing to add another name. Like,
yeah.
Why was anyone confused? I don't know.
I don't think anyone was confused. I think it was just Sanderson had the thought of these are also primary lenses, and then he made a character say it instead of just knowing that for himself.
It's
Yeah,
the pickle thing for Ursula K. Le Guin.
Exactly. We're bringing that up again of like,
Yeah.
I wish he could have just said, I know the pickles were there.
Yeah.
Do you have any other points that you want to talk about in terms of retcon, or should we move on to the new talents sort of thing?
No, I feel like that was the biggest one that like caught me off guard was the Knights of Crystalia acting different and the like primary, like, why are you talking about primary lenses?
Yeah. No, totally makes sense. So, Jack, you had a point to make about the dark talent.
Yeah, like the dark talent. Well, the dark talent is cool as shit. My favorite part of these books is when we are learning more about the talents.
Mm-hmm.
And that was part of the reason I think Scrivener's Bones was so big to me, because, they went into the tomb, they found Alcatraz the First, they learned about the talents, this idea of the talents and like learning more about the magic being connected. We had a whole conversation where we learned about how like oculator magic and talent and like talents are actually like pretty similar.
Yeah, in my notes, Jack's gonna love this talent conversation with Kaz.
Yeah, no, I love that. I love learning about it in what to me felt like an organic way, because you had a bunch of very smart people making guesses and putting together information, and there wasn't like they just found a book that explained this all. They actually were like kind of like discovering how it worked.
Mm-hmm.
That's one of Sanderson's like classic things he does in all of his books that I'm always a fan of, which is you're introduced to the magic. It's like, yeah, the magic works like this, and then by the end of the series you're like, oh wait, no, that's just what everyone thought. It's actually like more complicated or different or more nuanced. I love that stuff. And then the dark talent, I think one of my highlights were there was a part of the book that genuinely gave me chills, which is this whole book was very, very much on the whole, like, yeah, like Smedry talents maybe are a little scarier or less controllable than we think. The first books, they were very kind of just like funny, haha, like whatever. But this book seemed to really focus on the fact that like, no, like these talents are kind of chaotic, kind of uncontrollable. Really dug into the why is maybe Attica Smedry's plan of giving everyone talents probably a bad thing. Like if everyone was like had magically affecting reality powers that were as goofy and chaotic as the Smedry talents were, that would actually be probably a bad thing. And then at the end of this book, what I highlighted was this was when Alcatraz was in a really bad place. He was trying to save Bastille. His talent was rebelling against him, which once again, the focus on the talents being something kind of alive and separate that like had motivations, I was a big fan of. It felt like a really good progression from the previous books of these, and a great lead up to a book called Alcatraz versus the Dark Talent. But this was when Alcatraz was like, his talent like wasn't working. He was trying to save Bastille. An army of librarians was coming at him. And when he gets like really, really scared, really worried, knowing he had like failed everybody, something stirred inside of me, something that felt immense, like an enormous serpent shifting, moving, awakening. And that part gave me chills. And then that's when it then leads into like a bunch of like more of like him worried he's failing. Alcatraz the First had named it the breaking talent, the dark talent. Well, sometimes darkness can serve us, work for us. It welled up inside of me, bursting free, rising above me like an enormous and terrible cloud.
Yeah, it's good.
And then it does the thing that I know, Taylor, you mentioned you like in Way of Kings, where it like pulls the perspective out and like reports of that day are conflicting, and it starts talking about what other people saw.
Yeah, that's true. I think it was cool because it kind of felt like the talent was like a cursed item or like a curse that had its own agenda for the first time. I thought that was really interesting because like if it has its own agenda, like what the hell is it doing now?
Like what does it want? Like
what does
it clearly
want?
has wants. Maybe its wants is it just wants to break. And it's that simple, but that's still scary. Like
he also says in the end that he broke the Smedry talents and that's why they don't work. But it's also like the serpent kind of like left his body, so I don't know.
There was an implication like briefly, like they only touched on it in like one chapter, and or like in one paragraph. I feel like they didn't like really dig into this, but I noticed it. Was they seem to be going down a line of thought, which in a way every talent is a breaking talent, just like a little more diluted or niche or like subsetted. Like there was a paragraph where they're going into like, yeah, like Kaz's power is kind of breaking space, and Grandpa Smedley's talent is sort of breaking time and all this stuff.
Yeah,
And
he got to that
80
thought because
as well.
Yeah, he got to that thought
Yeah.
because Kaz was using his talent with Alcatraz, and Alcatraz was like, this feels weirdly familiar. This feels like breaking.
Yeah. So like Alcatraz has the original talent, it left, and then that takes everyone else's talent too, because they're all the breaking talent in some way.
Yeah.
There's also not super related, or actually this, or more on the talents was we also get a little more of a Branderson classic, which is magic that is intent and perception based.
Mm-hmm.
They really leaned into the idea that like, no, it's Grandpa Smedley is not late. His talent doesn't make him late. His talent makes him late to when he thinks he's being late. And you can, I actually really like that part of the book where they kind of trick his talent.
Yeah.
Where, Smedley's talent, Grandpa Smedley's talent is to be late. And that works if he thinks he's running late. So he was supposed to arrive like at dawn, but then Alcatraz told him, no, we need you at midnight. And because Grandpa Smedley thought on time was midnight, his talent made him show up at like 12:30,
So he
which actually made him faster.
Yeah.
He actually got there faster than everybody
Yeah.
because he thought he was late.
That was actually one of the things that one of my notes very early on in the book was Grandpa Smedley. Like, I like that he was left behind, because the thing that I really like about Grandpa Smedley is he's a cool character to have in small doses, but when you have too much of him, the problem is he's too powerful and he knows too much of what's going on. The, like, real sauce of a middle grade book of, like, the kids figuring shit out without adults, like, harder to do. That's why I think the first book is so weak, because Grandpa Smedley's there the whole time.
I hate that guy.
You hate Grandpa Smedley?
I hate that guy so bad. I think
Really?
that every time he gives Alcatraz like advice, it's always like really like self-centered and like bad. And like I hate the way he talks to Alcatraz. He's so like, he clearly like,
Alcatraz,
I don't know.
my boy.
Like, obviously he gives more of a fuck than his dad, but he's still like not that good of a dad. Like, I do not like him.
He's not a good. He gets points for he's not a good dad, but he gets points because he's trying to be a dad at least.
No, I know. It's not like drooling levels of like awful, which also makes him seem better. But he does not. He's not like good to Alcatraz. Like
No,
he's like
not at all.
not a very like kind like guiding hand. He's just like, here's these fucking lenses. Fuck you. Go do your shit. I'm not gonna tell you anything about these lenses. Good luck.
We're still burned by last book when he slapped Alcatraz. We're still on that.
Oh my god, yeah. I don't like that guy. I was glad he was gone.
But yes, I do think the book is generally stronger when he's out of it. And I was like disappointed by the fact that this book is positing Grandpa Smedley to be like the hero at the end of this book. And I was like, well, that robs Alcatraz of all this interesting stuff he's did. But no, Alcatraz is actually one who makes sure that inexplicably Grandpa Smedley is on time, which like is like, oh, that's a great way to give them both a heroic moment.
And also Grandpa Smedley was not even saving them. Like,
No.
Another one of the lines, and this kind of goes into the point I wanted to make talking about just like the depiction of war, because this is the first book where it really feels like there's actually a war happening.
Mm-hmm.
Like, rather, because all the other books were more like spy shit going on, and this was like, no, there's a war, like armies of people with guns shooting at each other, and not being barbaric and trying to kill each other, but.
It is operating in a very different mode. This is like the closest Alcatraz has gotten to like one of Sanderson's other books, or like just an epic fantasy in general. Because I saw someone describe these books as like Lemony Snickett meets superhero fiction, and that's like
on the cover.
Yeah, that's on the cover, and it's like. On some level, I'm like, I think that's okay. I don't think these books are as smart as Lemony Snickett, but
I've never read it, so.
You've never read any of Lemony Snickett?
I actually have no clue what that is. I've never seen that on the shelf.
That is a series
book?
of unfortunate events.
I know series. I just didn't know it by Lemony Snickett. I knew
Yeah.
series of unfortunate events.
Yeah, I recently reread the first 3 of those books. Those books are so funny and so clever. For anyone at home, I highly recommend the audiobooks, specifically the ones read by Tim Curry. I don't really like the full cast recording, but the Tim Curry audiobooks for those, like, fucking own.
But yeah, no, I think A Series of Unfortunate Events is a really good comparison.
Yeah.
Well, like a good comparison, even if like this book doesn't hit that same level, but it's like the same. It's kind of going for a similar vibe.
Yeah, absolutely. And yeah, do you have any more points you want to make about the depiction of war? Sorry, I cut you off.
I don't know if this is like a contradiction, but the book seems to put a lot of emphasis on, like, right at the start, Bastille and Alcatraz are doing weapons testing with like teddy bears that are actually grenades. And it's kind of funny because like they blow up and then Alcatraz is not hurt. And it's like, yeah, Bastille's like, yeah, they're not designed to hurt people. We're not barbaric. Yeah, war's no excuse for killing each other. Like, or some line along those levels, which I thought was like kind of funny. And then when we get to the actual war, they're like, everyone's using like stun coma guns, like, but then, and it seems to be this implication of like, yeah, they're fighting, but they're not like killing each other. But then there's like a lot of references to the fact that lots of people are dying in this war. And it seems like sometimes this is a sanitized war where people are just being knocked unconscious, and sometimes this is a real war where a lot of people are dying. And I understand that it can be both. Like, you know, they're generally trying to put people in comas, but people die. But to me, it felt a little bit like they were a little bit like when it was dramatic, they would bring up the part that when a dramatic beat was needed, they would bring up the fact that people do die during these. But otherwise, like, it's a little more sanitized.
And also, I generally find that like really disappointing because I think of things like kids are hungry for this. Kids really like. I mean, granted, I have a weird experience in life, and like I was shown a lot of stuff that I probably shouldn't have been shown as a kid, and that's why I have deeply fucked up tastes now. But I think kids are really hungry for work that takes them seriously. Like Percy Jackson, for example. Death is a constant threat in that series. Like, characters we really like die in almost every single book. Or even like the first, like Narnia book. Like, children's book to end all children's book. Like, Aslan fucking dies. He comes back because he's Jesus. But he does fucking die in that book. And like, kids, I think, are remarkably good self-censors, because I think a lot of kids who, if they approach a book that is too challenging for them, they're just not going to read it. Like, not to say that children's media should be violent and bloody, but like, again, I think kids have a real hunger for like actual stakes.
Yeah.
And occasionally this book cooks with that. Like, one of the lines I highlighted is, this is when the knights show up to join the battle, but it's also clear that they're like, okay, the knights showed up, but there's not enough of them to win. Like, this whole plan of the knights showing up, like, it worked. They got the knights to show up, but like, it's still only it's a few hundred super soldiers versus thousands of other like librarian soldiers. And there's this line where Drawlin is like taking Alcatraz and Kaz and like trying to get them to safety, and she's talking about how like, yeah, Tuki's doomed. I'm getting you out of here. And Kaz says, "So you're just giving up?" Kaz demanded. "Of course not," Drawlin said. "Now that we're here, we will fight and die. But my duty is to get Alcatraz and you other two to safety. My brothers and sisters will fight." And that to me was such a raw line in the middle of this book where it's like, yeah, no, we're going to fight. We're going to die. Keep moving.
I think that Graham's point was kind of like a good introduction of what my point at the end was, which is like that I think Alcatraz has an audience problem. So my background is that for 4 years I'd worked with kids as a camp counselor. And when you're a camp counselor, in most camps, I should say, I mean, I've worked at 3 different camps and it's done like this all the time. You kind of break up kids into like 5, 6, and then like 7s sometimes are on their own, and then, or they're like 7, 8, 9, and then like 10 to 12 are their own groups. And so I've worked kind of like within all 3 of those groups, and I've seen, and so like that's given me a really good perspective on childhood development. Like, I feel like I really understand the difference between like what a 5-year-old gets and understands versus like what an 8-year-old gets and understands and what an 8-year-old likes, because those 2 groups are extremely different. And I think the problem that Alcatraz has is that there are interesting lore and like character work that an 8-year-old would be really interested in and would love to read independently by themselves. But there are all these jokes in the way that like the characters talk to the audience, where I really could only see a 5-year-old laughing at. And when I say a 5-year-old, I mean like I know people are like, oh, you're a 5-year-old or whatever. I'm like talking about like actual 5-year-olds. The jokes where he's like, you're probably acting out this entire book. That's what I see like parent reading this book aloud to a 5 or 6-year-old who can't independently read on their own. And then I also see like there's a lot of like older jokes too for like parents where I see like, oh, he's clearly trying to get into that niche of like 5, 6 where like the parents are meant to read out loud to the kids. But like, again, I've worked with 5 and 6-year-olds a lot. 5 and 6-year-olds simply would not understand what's going on with the lore, with the talents, what's going on there in the way that an 8-year-old totally would and would love it.
Mm-hmm.
Like, it has an audience problem where I don't know that Sanderson knows this distinct difference, because the 8-year-old's gonna feel really demeaned by like these weird jokes about like, you know, like, oh, you should act out all this stuff and like be like silly and goofy.
There's nothing more galling than being treated like a child, especially when you happen to be one.
Yeah, exactly. Kids, you know, an 8-year-old doesn't want to feel like a kid. An 8-year-old wants to be like included with the big kids, and would look up to Alcatraz as a 13-year-old, because when 8-year-olds want to be the 13-year-old so bad. And so like, you've already got that almost there, and then he's got all this cool lore. If he had just matured the jokes up to something like an 8-year-old would love, and not tried to hit the like parents reading out loud to a 5-year-old, and like, because like I said, like the stuff with the lore, the stuff with Bastille, and like the intricacies of Bastille and Alcatraz's relationship with each other is something like 8-year-olds are so like students of like the human condition. They are like figuring out how to make friendships. They are figuring out how like cliques work and how like people interact with each other, and they're like looking to you to see how you interact with your like peers in the same way, in the way that 5-year-olds are not. 5-year-olds are in their own world. They don't really know what's going on yet. They don't want that, like, they just want to like giggle at like fart jokes and like be like silly and goofy and like have a good time. So like, yeah, I think that the reason Alcatraz didn't do well, like the entire series didn't do well, is because Sanderson was unable to pin down exactly who his audience was.
There's a version of this that is written for 8-year-olds in the way that you talk about, that is a household name, like a series of unfortunate events.
Exactly.
Like, maybe it would never have been like something as Harry Potter big, but like there's something where it is like it still has an adaptation. It is still that kind of narrative.
Yeah, and I think, I mean, yeah, and Harry Potter, I think, is even, you know, Harry Potter is even for like, you know, that 10 to 12 audience that's a little bit older, which is, you know, even, which makes it even cooler to 8-year-olds is what I should say.
Yeah,
like,
of course.
Or like it's kind of like a status thing for an 8-year-old. But yeah, I think, and also I think that first book that was super off the rails, super goofy, talking dinosaurs, you know, it's like, you've already alienated the audience that's going to love the lore. So now that it's going to be pretty much just parents and their 5-year-old kids, you're writing this lore for like parents, because the 5-year-olds, I mean, you know.
I just realized who this series is for. This series is for Jack in like 10 years when he has children.
Exactly. I also think what could be happening here is that, like, I have this experience with kids, so I know what the average 5-year-old and the average 8-year-old is like very well, because I have this experience. I think there is, like, Sanderson, I think, probably was a pretty advanced reader when he was younger, and might be writing it for, like, little Sanderson, who was maybe 6 years old and able to read this, where the average 6-year-old needs assistance still. Like, you gotta be like 7 or 8 before you're starting to be like an independent reader for most.
Yeah.
For most.
What, I was a weirdly like little formal child, so in this one way I relate to our concept of Sanderson.
No, that's what I'm saying. It could be like for like advanced. Exactly. I'm saying it's like this maybe is hitting a
I would have
very
eaten this shit up.
extremely niche advanced 5-year-old, advanced 6-year-old, like someone who's already an independent reader but is still young enough to enjoy this.
On the note of just like having an audience, I was actually just trying to look up, like, while you were talking, Taylor, like how old his kids would have been when he wrote this book.
Unborn, I would have thought.
No, so his first child, which once again, I'm having a hard time finding like super specific information.
Honestly,
which,
props to Sanderson for doing that.
Yeah, fair enough, right? It seems like their first child was born in 2007, which is the same year the first Alcatraz book came out, and so when this book came out, his children, at least one of his children would have been like 3.
Yeah.
Okay.
Because I know it's pretty common for authors who write children's books, like especially when it's like one part of their repertoire that they were kind of writing for their children, and maybe there was a little bit of that, but there wasn't like he didn't have like literal children of the age to be reading these books in his house while he was writing these.
Yeah, and I feel like with if you don't have that experience with kids, it can be easy to put kids into such a monolith, and if you don't understand like childhood development, which I think was what was happening here, and I think that's why this failed as like a long-term series. I'm sure that had like some success when it came out initially.
Yeah, and again, I find this very like charming, but again, it doesn't have that staying power.
Mm-hmm.
This would have been one of those books that like I read when I was like little, and then would be surprised when I met a single other person that had ever read that and be like, "Oh my god,
yeah,
someone else."
I had a smaller point just about this in general. Is one thing I do really appreciate about these books is I really miss the era of if you went to the library as a little kid and your library only had book 2 of a series, that was fine. I think that a little kid would totally be fine showing up and just starting with like Scrivener's Bones, or even like just starting with Knights of Crystalia. Alcatraz says at the beginning of this book not to do that, but you can just sort of drop in. It's not as drop in as something like I would say Percy Jackson, where like, again, I'm going to keep going back to that, where like you could read any one of those first 5 books like not in order. Like you could start with book 5 and like to an 11-year-old it would still make sense.
Yeah.
And like kids are really willing to suspend their disbelief. And I miss that era. I like, not just because it like that's my childhood experience now, but I feel like there's so much more of an obligation to like start at the beginning, get through the whole thing, be all caught up, that sort of thing, which is again part of the reason that we ended up doing our stupid Wheel of Time thing of dropping it on book fucking 12. But I do think that the only place that I still sort of see this like be completely fine just to drop in whatever is this sort of middle grade book. Which is a shame, because I wish there was more serialized stuff where you could just be like, oh, I'll just drop in for this one. I don't need to see the whole show to know how it works.
I think we're pretty far. I think that's a past genre of storytelling.
Yeah.
Like even like sitcoms. Maddie and I are working our way through Abbott Elementary. Great show, highly recommend it if you haven't watched it, listeners. It's the same premise as The Office, where like a camera crew comes in to like witness work being done, but it's like elementary school teachers. It's really cute. It's really fun, but it's also, despite being a sitcom, serialized. It would like, you can drop in
or not serialized.
Well, you can drop in on every episode, but there is a degree of like, no, but there's enough of like an ongoing story that I still think it's better to watch it in order. Yeah. Compared to like, I don't know, like Always Sunny. Like I feel like you can watch like just any episode randomly in Always Sunny.
Absolutely.
And never feel like you're missing anything.
I wonder if that has anything to do with like the death of like literary magazines where like people don't really read those. I don't know. Do people read those? I feel like that's not like that common anymore, where like a lot of science fiction and fantasy authors got their start submitting like chapters at a time.
I mean, I still have I have a subscription to OnSpec, and my dad has a subscription to Analog, and we'll trade those every month when those come in. But
okay, maybe.
But
maybe
like,
I'm wrong.
I mean, there are people who read that, but I think my dad and I are the exception. Like, I would not be reading these short story collections that come out in this way if not for the fact that like my dad has had a subscription to Analog for a long time.
Yeah, that's fair. Did you make your point about children's lit more broadly?
Yeah. We can move on to whatever we want to hit next. Do we want to talk about Papa and Mama Smedry? Do we want to hit that?
Yeah, sure.
There's not a ton to say it other than just like it continues to be one of my favorite parts of this book as well, is just the whole we learn what the divide between Shasta and Attica Smedry is, like why they're on opposite sides, because Attica wants to give talents to everybody and that scares the shit out of Shasta.
Yeah. Reasonably.
Like,
she makes a pretty good point.
She makes a really good argument. There's a great scene where she's having a conversation with Alcatraz, and she explains this, where she's like, she very reasonably is like, yeah, like look at how chaotic Smedry's are, and when it's just like one, family of people that has these powers, that's already like you guys make a huge impact on the world all the time. Now imagine if literally everybody had, like, imagine if 1 in like 1,000 human beings had the breaking talent. Right? Imagine if every single person had all these crazy reality. Imagine if just like 1,000 people across the planet had I can't remember her name, Adi? The bad at math. Yeah, the bad at math talent.
She's named for ADX, which is the Supermax facility in Florida.
Oh my god.
I'm not going to lie, I actually fully forgot about the prison bit. I fully forgot about it.
Wait, like ADX?
ADX is the name of the prison, yeah.
That's funny. But yeah, and then this book ends with Alcatraz kind of being on his mom's side and being like, actually, I think my dad is the bad guy here. Like, I think my dad should not give everyone Smedry talents. I think they literally use the analogy, imagine if everybody had a nuclear bomb.
Yeah.
Kind of making a good point. And I'm actually really curious how it's going to resolve, because like just being like sort of genre aware or genre savvy, it feels like it's going to come around on some. It's like his mom's not completely right for some reason.
No, you know what I think it's going to be? I'm going to think that his mom is like, she doesn't get a full redemption arc, but they sort of like agree to work with each other at the end. Again, I think sort of like this Darth Vader thing of like, she does this good thing. But I think part of the reason that the book 6 is going to be like written by Bastille is like something happens to Alcatraz's dad, and he's so like guilt-ridden about it that he can't write the next book. He doesn't want him to be the villain.
Yeah. And
we'll see.
Next book, we're getting the Alcatraz and Shasta team up book, and I am so like I'm worrying myself a little bit that I'm hyping up the drama of the Smedry family and how well that's going to be, and I might be disappointed by it resolving in a disappointing way.
I don't think we're ever going to get a book as good as Scrivener's Bones out of this series again, and like I would be delighted to be wrong. But Scrivener's Bones does in fact rule, and I think it's the only book where like everything sort of lined up perfectly. And maybe I'll be wrong. Maybe Bastille is excellent, or The Dark Talents is excellent. We'll see. One other thing I wanted to bring up about that conversation is it's another thing of Sanderson doing something that I don't love from him, is we get this conversation from Kaz and Alcatraz where they're figuring out why Alcatraz can do the specific things that he can, of like being both a Smedry and an oculator and all these different things. And then we get the first half of Shasta and Alcatraz's conversation is Shasta just confirming it and like giving us more nuanced lore takes. And I'm like, just cut one of these. Like, you don't need them both. But because the stuff that's actually interesting there is all of like Shasta's ideology, all of her character work, her telling us a little more detail about the lore. Like, I know that matters to Jack, and like, you know what, Jack, you deserve to feast. But also it's weird that we get it twice.
I would say that like if you're reading a chapter a night with a kid, that it's important.
Yeah, okay.
It's not so bad to recap.
You
know what? That's fair. I wasn't thinking about it that way, but now that you're putting it that way, sure, absolutely.
Yeah, like read it once, then reinforce it later, kind of thing. Rule of 3, all that fun stuff.
Yeah. This is so off topic, I would be interested in seeing what it's like to read the Hamlet chapter to a kid.
Oh, wait, I totally forgot about that.
I mean, I, as a weird little kid, would love that. When I was 8, my father took me to see The Merry Wives of Windsor, and I loved it. But
Also, there's a joke in it that if a kid asked me what it was, it would have been hard to answer, because Bastille kicks someone in the crotch, and she says, Get thee to a nunnery. And I was like, how do you explain that one to a kid? That's for the parents.
As someone who is currently chemically castrating themselves, I appreciated the joke.
Oh my god.
It's my fun way of describing HRT. But one of the things that I really liked the Hamlet sequence at first. I was like, oh, this is for me. And then they overplayed the joke. And I was like, damn it. Okay.
I was just so confused that they didn't use to be or not to be. I was like,
I know.
The line. What do you mean?
It's right there. The stuff at the end of that chapter where it's just the sort of lines Alcatraz and Bastille are quoting it, and like it is actually taking on that greater resonance. It's not just a fun reference. That's the only part of it that really worked for me. Because all the stuff where it was just like they were just adding in the lines as jokes, and I was just like, whatever. It's fine. It's cute. But again, written for a very specific kind of child.
So let's talk about momentum, maybe?
Sure. Just something that I want to bring up that, again, is stronger in this book, and a point that we sort of hit and then go, I'm sort of like, this is one of the things I had an issue with, is this book has a ton of momentum, and like the literal act of traveling makes this book more interesting, at least to me. And the part where it starts to slow down a lot is as soon as they hit the siege and characters sort of have to just sit there. And like something about Sanderson writing actual travel, his actual storytelling is stronger and more compelling. The siege is still good. I really like Alcatraz becoming king. I think that is like a cute and good portrayal of like what a good king is supposed to be to like a young impressionable kid, like projecting hope and all of these different ideas. But the fact that the literal action is moving really is one of Sanderson's strengths, and I just wish there was more of that. And I think that's the weakest part of the Scrivener's Bones as well for me, is like when we're just hanging out in the library and there's no like driving force, they're just sort of exploring the library. That's where it's weakest to me. And then when they have like more specific goals, they have to evade the villain, they have to trick this person, that's when it's stronger. On that point, related to the sort of momentum, unless you had a point, Taylor.
I was also going to say that I actually think that the Scrivener Bones used momentum perfectly because, the whole... Well, I would say that, like, a lot of that book is traveling, but the moment that Bastille and Alcatraz got stuck in a hole is when we also resolved our emotional subplot. When they felt like they were stuck, it kind of, like, relieved the emotional subplot, which was, like, a really good way to do, like, being trapped. Whereas other books did not use that momentum versus being trapped to have the different beats that line up. Yeah.
What you need is variety. On that point, the other thing about sort of momentum is this series really suffers from the fact that it does not have one villain. Like, we have an organization as villains, but the fact that we don't have, like, someone who can show up consistently. I'm going to try and say her name, Kanchenjunga Sharik Chaka. The fact that she doesn't show up again, and I'm going to guess she probably never does.
Probably not.
The fact that we have, like, a villain of the week style thing is way weaker.
Well, I think that's kind of what Shasta is supposed to be.
But again, she's not really the villain.
Right.
And
she's
also,
not like an antagonizing force.
Exactly. The thing about Shasta is she's a fascinating character, but she doesn't have villainous presence. And that's what I want out of a book like this. Like, again, Kilimanjaro, strongest villain we've seen, of like, that dude is scary. He's scary in the way that Darth Vader is scary. I think we've mentioned Overly Sarcastic Productions before. I quite like them. But they've talked about this as like a menacing villain. It is a specific kind of villain. The fact that we don't have a consistent one, I think, is a real weakness of these books. And not every story needs to have a villain. But these are superhero stories. Those ones absolutely do.
Yeah, that's fair.
The villain is societal expectations.
Yeah, I feel like maybe he didn't know that it was a supervillain story until he got like the reviews back from the first book. But then again, this is the fourth book, so you should be knowing.
He should know by now. We've actually hit the No Grandpa Smedry thing as well, and
the point I added about garden writing versus outlining, that was actually just because the conversation Taylor and I had last night at your party.
Yeah.
About it, yeah.
Yes, for the record, listeners, my birthday was last night.
So we all
I'm
all
older.
saw
So
each other.
everyone, as a birthday gift to Graham, make sure to like and share and positively review this episode.
Tell a friend.
Tell a friend.
No, if you truly want to celebrate my birthday the way that I would want you to, kiss someone beautiful. One of my absolute favorite toasts of all time is, may we kiss whom we please and please whom we kiss. You want to do gardening and outlining first?
Well, just because we already brought it up.
Yeah, go ahead and hit that. And then we'll do middle book syndrome, and then we can actually close on the indigenous portrayal, and then anything else we want to hit.
It came up because we were talking about, because Brandon Sanderson is uploading his like newest series of lectures on writing, which I think are generally enjoyable. Highly recommend if you're like into writing. I think there's a lot of really good advice, a really good thought, a lot of good stuff in there. Talked a lot about gardening versus outlining as a writing strategy. For any of you that are unfamiliar, that's basically the different approaches to writing, which are you outline very, very heavily. You have a detailed outline and you're following a plan, versus garden writing or pants writing, as in like flying by the seat of your pants, which is just you just kind of start writing and see where the story goes. And there's a lot of, overlap and gray zone, and it's not like it's a lot more nuanced than just your one or the other. But Brandon Sanderson is basically pretty famous for being a very strong outliner. That's kind of his whole thing. Is like he's had Stormlight books 1 through 10 outlined for ages. And that outline might change and adapt, but he very much did work off the outline. He said in one of these lectures that Alcatraz sort of was his attempt at garden writing, his attempt at just kind of writing and flying by the seat of his pants, which was kind of interesting to learn, considering these books are so loaded with like, yeah, we'll do this in this chapter of this book, or like we'll get to this in book 5, et cetera, which is really funny to think about, considering that apparently for this book series he did far less outlining.
No, that actually makes total sense to me with some of the criticisms that we've leveled at Alcatraz of like, particularly that no villain thing. Like they all have a villain of the week.
Yeah. Yeah, when Walton told me this, I found myself enjoying the book less because I was like, oh, he didn't actually plan most of this stuff. That's why these jokes are so like repetitive and not that fun. Yeah, I thought the first part of this book was slogging. They made the joke where like about like the math thing like one too many times for me, and I was like,
yeah,
I don't know.
Which joke about the math thing?
I don't know, like whenever she finished a math problem, it always came out to like 6 for some reason, and I was like, why is it always 6? Like,
I think the
choose
joke is she's
choose
a
a different
6-year-old.
number.
Also,
She's
I
8.
didn't do the math, but I'm wondering if the long sequence where Alcatraz does like the calculus for 80 to solve, I wonder if the math is correct there. Because that would be a really good joke that like no one is going to check.
There's no way, because there's like 2 square roots and it would have ended up in a decimal.
Yeah.
Not a whole number. I mean, it might have
Let
might have
me
ended
go
up
back
in
and find it.
might have ended up in a whole number if he did it like
Hold on.
perfectly like that, but
Alcatraz versus the Shattered Lens. I hope there's some motherfucker on Reddit who's already done this for me. Math joke.
I'm sure when it's written out the way it was, it sounds long and complicated, but I'm sure like if you actually write it out, it's like a pretty
I know, because
straightforward math
at one point he added 1 million and then subtracted 1,000,001. So right,
yeah.
like
I really like the chapter titles are also a good running joke throughout this one. The fact that we have chapter we have like chapter 10 and it's like Avogadro's Constants is a really good chapter title. That's very fun.
What chapter are we on right now? Oh, we're on chapter 8,675,309.
Yeah.
Which is actually chapter like 15 or 16 or something.
Yeah, he had chapter 6, and then he had chapter pi, and then he had chapter 4, and I was like, pi is smaller than 6 and 4. What the heck?
It's all to throw. Remember to throw off the librarians.
Yeah, I didn't realize we were going in order at that point, or like we were not.
I remember when that started. I
order.
kept being like, I was just waiting for the payoff because I knew it's like, okay, this is going to be like one of the last chapters. It's finally going to address why he's doing the chapter numbering this way.
Did someone do it?
No, unfortunately, no one has done it.
You remember what chapter it's in?
No, I will find it later because this is not particularly interesting podcast material, but I will log on to Wolfram Alpha and put the whole thing in and see what happens. Because, like, again, that would be a joke for a very specific kind of person, but it's the kind of joke I would put in a book if I wrote one. And also, there's the implication that Adie is much better at math than she actually, like, claims to be.
Or it's not that she's much better at math, it's that she's like aware of the way her talent works. And so she's kind of like,
yeah,
she's like, I know I'm bad at math and I'm giving wrong answers, but I'm intentionally convincing myself that they're the correct answers.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah,
so
she
that my
basically
talent keeps working.
Yeah, she basically just turns her brain off and says the first number that comes to her head instead of doing math.
So yeah, I think this book does kind of show that like Sanderson's talents are in the outlining side of things, though.
Yeah.
Because if this is him when he does more garden writing, it's like, okay, yeah, like go back to what you're used to.
Damn.
That's where he's.
Damn. Go back. Get back in your lane.
Listen, okay. No, I meant it more in a like, okay, he tried both styles, and it's important to explore and discover where your talents are, and that's what he did.
Fair. What is middle book syndrome? Who wrote that?
That's me. Just the other thing of like, while I think broadly this book is better than Knights of Crystalia, it does sort of just feel like, saving Mokia is very important, but the way that is not as centered, even in the resolution of this book, of like, we don't really talk to any of the Mokians. We get a description of Alcatraz being like, I talked to some of the Mokians. Yeah, it's very.
We get a few scenes of learning about Mokia and like
no. I mean, it's
more than shallow way.
Yeah, absolutely. And like that's something I want to talk about because there's some stuff in there that I don't love. Specifically with the middle book syndrome, I sort of think of like, well, what actually happened in this book? Because Mokia is saved, but we get to the end, and the book at the end is sort of like, and now we can go tell the real story in some ways, and like. I don't love that, and like that's not to say like that's like saying any series is pointless because there's a final book that you could just skip to the end. Obviously, Journey Before Destination, to make Sanderson's point. But at the same time, it does sort of feel like if this is the story you want to tell in one of your books, you have to convince me the whole time that this is the most important story to be telling right now, especially when you are doing a book that is in part about the craft of writing. And like, because again, so much of this book is Alcatraz giving us his thoughts, and by extension Sanderson's thoughts about just the craft of writing. And yeah, it's just a small thing I noticed. And again, it's not everywhere in this book. A lot of this book is very fun and like totally readable.
Yeah, that's fair. I think he says in the end that like, oh, this is what all of the Free Kingdomers would know me by. This is my big story. But obviously we're not Free Kingdomers, so like,
yeah.
Which is the way it's framed is like that, but like in reality, like this did feel very big to me.
Yeah. Well, because it was the resolution of the whole. It was resolution of the whole war. I mean, the war felt like it did feel like kind of sudden to be that, but also like it was that was the plot. What happened in this book was that the main setting conflict, the conflict of the setting, was resolved.
Yeah, I guess my point is I wish that had more weight, just because like as you said, it's so sudden that I feel like. In some ways, it feels like the book wants to move on to something else, but knew it had to resolve this as well. And maybe that's just me.
That's fair. I mean, I would say when you say like nothing happened in this book, I would agree because I think that all of what happened in this book happened in the last like 10%, which is, that's what I would think. Like, I agree. I don't think anything happened in this book before the last 10%.
Yeah. And it's funny because we got a joke about cutting all these chapters out of it. And it's like, you could have done that for real just a little bit. But again, I'm sure that would introduce a whole bunch of different problems. And also, I've never written a book. It seems very hard. Regardless, the last thing that I sort of want to hit is, again, I mentioned there's a lot of ideology in this book. And a lot of that comes in with sort of the portrayal of indigenous people. Now, I am not from the Pacific Islands. I am not a Pacifica person. Eamon, come on the show. I really want to pick your brain about some of these things that, like, Sanderson seems really interested and concerned with. Specifically with, like, Pacific Islanders, specifically Pacifica peoples, because this is a through line now. It's not just a thing that he's done once. He's now doing it in Alcatraz. He's now doing it in Stormlight. Like, this is a thing that he seems concerned with, which, again, is not something I would expect from his background as a man who, one, is Mormon, and two, he speaks Korean. Again, I would for the language that you speak, I would expect that one to come up more. There's a scene where we're talking about huts, and I think we were about to get sort of the same sort of, like, Bastille being like, huts are actually a more advanced technology than air conditioning, that sort of thing. And the king of Mokia is like, actually, we like huts, and it's fine that we live in this way, which is, again, a fine thing to say, and it's a fine counterpoint to Bastille. But a lot of it is
we learned that Bastille was mostly doing that out of pride for the Free Kingdom the whole time. And we should take her whole, like, everything in the Free Kingdoms is more advanced, actually, with a grain of salt.
Yes. The other thing that sort of got me about it is a lot of it is sort of noble savage stuff. And not entirely, because it's not, like, noble warriors, because Mokians are scholars as a nation, but I'm glad there's something to be done to taking this, like, Hushland versus Free Kingdom stuff a little more seriously. But the book basically says huts are good, actually, and I really don't like the claim that Pacifica peoples didn't advance beyond, like, rudimentary architecture, because Hawaii has a deeply fascinating architectural history, and while, like, natural fibers and, like, grass woven and thatch buildings, that sort of thing, are part of it. Like, a lot of it is really fascinating post-colonial architecture that still has Hawaiian history. And, like, I'm using Hawaii in here specifically because that's the one I'm most familiar with in terms of its architectural history. But the fact that Mokia is in communication with a ton of these different nations does sort of beg the question of, like, well, where is that? And I really just don't like the claim that, like, Pacifica peoples didn't advance beyond very rudimentary architecture, because that's simply not true. There's all sorts of, like, these beautiful, beautiful turn-of-the-century buildings from, like, the early 1900s that are absolutely gorgeous and don't look like any other buildings in the world. And those are completely 100% Hawaiian. And I would have loved to have seen something like that. If you're going to do fantasy stuff, like, do that as your inspiration.
They did do that a little bit, though. I mean, they described how, like, everything was covered in these, like, beautiful flowers, and, like, they did go a little bit.
That was leaning more into stereotype to me than it was into, like, actually reaching into a historical moment like they would be for this architectural stuff. It's a very surface level read of, like, oh yeah, Hawaii is flowers and hula skirts and, like, like specific kinds of wrap clothing. And it's like, sure, it can be that in some ways, but that's not the only thing. And I think that's sort of one of the problems when you fantasyify a real people, one of the things that you might run into.
Yeah.
Generally, like, I get what you mean, that, like, I don't know, I'm sort of mixed, because on the one hand, it's like, it gave a very positive depiction. Like, to me, it read like the point of the whole Mokian thing was, the point was, we are living the way we are happy, and, like, it doesn't matter if it's more or less. Like, that's what I took away from that whole scene.
Yeah.
Like, it doesn't matter if we are more or less advanced or whatever, like, whatever criteria you're using for that. The point is, this is how we want to live, and that should be respected, and that should be seen as, like, worthwhile. And, like, we are not, like, lesser in any way for how we want to live.
And all of that is true, and I think that is good. But there is ideology there that Sanderson has as someone who is white and Western, that I think that, again, this is before he has sensitivity readers. And again, I'm a white person. I'm not probably the one making this critique most primarily. Again, this is why I would love to talk to someone from this part of the world and listen to what they think. And like, but the thing that also gets me is the book sort of interchangeably uses Hawaiian and Maori. That's sort of what it bothers me, is like this rounding off of like complexity there. They're generally in the same part of the world, but they're still miles apart and have very distinct cultures. And those are not interchangeable.
Sure. I mean, I would also say that they're in the middle of the two, though. Like, geographically, in this fantasy book, he's fantastically put them in between the two, like, cultures.
Yeah, it's like,
so, like
Moki has a continent literally between the two.
Again,
like,
it's just
that,
important to me when like there are real world implications all around us. It is important to have the second thought, to quote our document, to quote Natalie Watson.
That can be fair, and maybe it kind of shows as well that Sanderson's choice of research, like, he doesn't necessarily want to put as much research into his Alcatraz books as he wants to put into his other books, and like he just wanted to like get it out, maybe. Like, he's not interested in doing
and again
research.
I could be wrong. Maybe there is deep cuts here that I am missing as someone who knows a weird amount about Hawaiian architecture and a little about the colonization of Hawaii, but am unfortunately more ignorant of that history than I should be.
Yeah.
Like, I'm there may be deep cuts that I'm missing. That's the kind of thing Sanderson loves to do, of like getting his facts straight and then distorting them at his leisure, to quote Twain. That's something that he's very good at. But anyway, I just wanted to bring that up because, again, there's a lot of ideology. There's also, I could go on to the thing of like, Alcatraz has a little tangent about religion here in the middle of the book. And it's mostly fine. It's just funny of like, the reason I'm not bringing up religion is because it offends a lot of people.
And then immediately brings it up. I thought that was funny. I liked it.
It was a good joke. The one thing I will say is the fact that Alcatraz chooses Judaism as the religion that he wants to, that he would say. One, the joke is good. Yeah,
it was funny.
That was a funny joke that he ends up saying. What is the actual?
The joke is about the food and the food restrictions.
Yeah, like religion is fundamentally about food restriction.
It's like, go with, like, if you have to choose a best religion, I'm paraphrasing the joke probably poorly, but if you have to choose a best religion, go with Judaism because it's the path of yeast resistance.
Exactly, yeah. Which, like, very dumb joke. However, I do think it's funny, again, that we have a Mormon writer advocating for Judaism, because that is a very Mormon thing of, again, Mormons and the Jews both believe themselves to be the chosen people, but Mormons believe that Jews are, some of them, kind of. It's nuanced. Again, we don't have. We'll save this for the next Stormlight Archive book. We'll get into it then. Okay. Do we want to get our question from Josh, and then we can do our rankings and close out?
Yes, I would
Sounds
love
good to
that.
me.
All right. Hi, Beachcombers. By the time your next episode, February, comes out, you'll be at 1 year old already. Holy shit, I'm so glad. I get to look forward to your discussions every month. Thank you for what you do. Looking back over a year or more of podcasts, what is the biggest thing you feel like you've learned about Sanderson or his work by doing this show? Thanks, Josh.
Great question. Let me think about that.
Very good.
I mean, this isn't so much a learn about Sanderson, so much as a learn about literary critique, but like, I feel like I've learned a lot about how to look at the implications underneath what is being said. Like, there's the difference between like the intentional message and then like the message that might come across, and like noticing those biases and kind of coming to what sometimes is a kind of hard realization that you can take a person who generally has good intent, but they still write something that ends up having a bad message. And there's a sort of degree of separating intent versus actual message that needs to be done when doing literary criticism. And I feel like that comes up a lot with Sanderson, and learning about Sanderson in particular was really understanding, like, authors are not static individuals, and they are going to change. Like, their depiction of things, how they depict, how they, their ideology, all of that stuff. And with someone like Sanderson, you can really see that change as you continue to read his books, especially in the order we're doing it.
Yeah. No, absolutely. I'm trying
feel
to
like-
think. Go ahead, Taylor.
I think I thought of one when it comes to Sanderson. I think in the last year, it's been interesting to see how his depiction of women has evolved.
Mhm.
I think that starting with Elantris was a deeply misogynistic book, not only as in explicit theme, but it was also implicit in ways that I don't think Sanderson was intending. And so to see that book, to Mistborn, which had a female main character, but no women who were side characters, and if there was a woman, then usually ended up killing them, and then moving to a book like Warbreaker that was extremely sexually, like, free and like very different, and had like two extremely deep, strong female main characters, and then kind of jumping to Shallan and her portrayal of and Yasna's, seeing their femininity kind of playing off of each other, and all of the misogyny that is baked into this, seeing how he baked misogyny into Stormlight versus how he baked misogyny into Elantris was definitely a study in seeing how he's evolved and can do things in a lot more I think talented or a better way. Like I think that Stormlight is ended up a better portrayal than Elantris, certainly, because Elantris, the bar's on the floor. So yeah, I think it was really, really cool this past year to watch Sanderson evolve his writing of women in his own personal life. He married Emily between the books of Mistborn and Warbreaker, and to see how maybe that had like an influence. He got more popular, he got more women to read his books, I think also had an influence. I am still waiting for a book to top Warbreaker. Warbreaker, I think, was my top fantasy book of last year in general. Like, of all the books I read, I deeply love Warbreaker. I do want to reread it this year, honestly. Like, I loved it that much. So yeah, that was just really cool to watch, and I'm excited to see how it continues, because I don't think this Sanderson that we're reading right now is at his final stage, especially being someone who read, I mean, I obviously don't remember anything about it. What is it called? Oh, Skyward. And which is a much more recent book, and I remember not even, like, I don't really even remember having a criticism about, I don't even remember it was like written, I didn't even remember like Skyward was like written by a man, so like when I read it back in the day. So like I'm excited to see him continue to evolve in that way, because that's something I really pay attention to. Yeah, as most of our listeners would probably pick up on.
That Skyward definitely fixes the Mistborn problem of female main character, but then no female side characters.
Yeah.
I think the biggest thing I've learned is, for a long time, I read the Mistborn trilogy, I read a couple of other things, and I didn't really get it. I understood, like, yeah, these are okay, I don't understand why they're as popular as they are. And now I'm sort of starting to solidify that. And I think the thing that these books annoy me in a lot of ways, and I think having to analyze them in a more structured environment like this has made it so I am more willing to give them credit when it's due, rather than just dismissing them out of hand. Because again, broadly, I think I am still the person who is the biggest hater of the three of us, and like the least warm on Sanderson overall. And I like really seeing the moments where like he's good at the damn thing, and seeing the moments where he's shined is one of the things I was not expecting to come out of this show. Like, fundamentally, I was still expecting I would understand it, but I would still not like it. And in some ways, I don't. But there are elements of it that I like now, and particularly the reread of Hero of Ages. I appreciate that book so much more now. There are huge sections of it that don't work for me at all. But like that ending, or the stuff in Warbreaker that I think is very good, or even Scrivener's Bones or Elantris in many ways. Like, there's stuff in there that I'm like, oh, I get it now. Yeah, I guess we're going to do our rankings, which is Alcatraz versus the Shattered Lens is at the top.
You're putting Alcatraz and the Shattered Lens at the top of your rankings so far?
Remember, we're doing it just for 2025, so we're just doing...
Oh.
We have one book on the list.
I was like, what?
I mean,
Graham,
for the record...
Yeah.
if we're doing the whole thing again, Hero of Ages, Scrivener's Bones, Warbreaker, Elantris, Mistborn, Way of Kings, Knights of Crystalia, Shattered Lens, Alcatraz 1, Well of Ascension.
I'm just going to say, I think that this book is less good than Elantris, but I think it's better than Knights of Crystalia Book 3. That's where I put it.
I'm very similar, I think. Of the Alcatraz books, I think this is maybe my third favorite. It's not. I think I liked Knights of Crystalia the least.
Here's what I'll say. I think Shattered Lens is a better book than Knights of Crystalia, and I liked it less.
I really didn't like Knights of Crystalia.
I didn't like Knights of Crystalia all that much, but I think there's more scenes in there that I think on in hindsight more fondly. I can't tell you much about Knights of Crystalia, but I can tell you about the good
Australia?
librarian. Australia. Oh. No, the good librarian. What's her name? Himalaya.
Oh yeah.
That's it.
Himalaya.
I look back on Himalaya really fondly and that sort of thing. And I'm thinking about the stuff in this book, and the thing that I'm going to look back on really fondly is a single joke.
Oh my god. I thought that the combination of figuring out that the bestower's lens and the flesh stone,
the bestower's lens is pretty
be
cool.
Thinking about that. I thought that was very cool.
Yeah, the bestower's lens is really good, but
when they introduced the bestower's lens, the first thing I wrote down was, at some point he's going to give someone the breaking talent using this.
Yeah.
Oh.
And again, Sanderson has a certain gas that he can turn on during fight scenes. And that fight scene is really cool. It leans into what I think is really good about his work. But at the same time, for some reason, even the really cool combat doesn't really stick with me from this series. So I think I'm going to remember one joke, unfortunately.
Oh, damn. All right. Next month, y'all can join us for I Hate Dragons and Infinity Blade Awakening.
Ooh, we're finally at Infinity Blade.
So we're going to play Infinity Blade. We're going to read the novelization.
Oh, hell no.
Are we going to play it? I did.
Yeah.
I came to the realization. I remember we had this conversation before, but I came to the realization that I actually did play this game.
Yeah.
And just forgot about it. Blocked it from my memory.
Y'all have fun with that. I'll watch,
Yes.
Maybe. I'll watch you guys.
Sure. I mean,
I'm not playing that.
Gonna be Jack and I talking, or Jack, Sophie, and I will have played it, and then because again,
I'll watch a YouTube video of
that's fair.
people streaming it or something. I'm not playing it though.
And again, friend of the show Sophie will be on, and currently we do have a special guest for June. I don't want to announce that until we get closer, in case anything falls through with scheduling. But currently we do have a special guest who's going to be reading Emperor's Soul with us in June. All right. I think that's it.
J.R.R. Tolkien.
The ghost of J.R.R. Tolkien is coming back from the dead, specifically to show up on a podcast that he would hate.
Hell yeah.
All right. We'll see you all next month for Infinity Blade Awakening and I Hate Dragons. Thank you so much for listening. Until next time, grab the book and hit the beach.
Grab a book and hit the beach.
A Grain of Sanderson is created by Graham Gillman, Taylor Lane, and Jack McLaughlan. I edit and produce the show. Our logo is by our very talented friend Ven Busby. Our theme music is Goodnight Kiss by 2Mellow off the album Midnight Broadcasts. You can find their work at 2mellow.net, that's the number 2, MELLO, and 2Mellow Makes at bandcamp.com. If you'd like to support the Beachcombers further, you can do that in the following ways. First, please tell your friends about this podcast. Sharing the pod in a Discord, writing a thoughtful post on social media, or otherwise telling your friends really helps us out. You can also support us by following us on social media. Taylor works very hard on our Instagram. Or by buying a book from our bookshop, of which we see a small cut. Both those links are in the episode description. Questions, critiques, encouragement? Please write us an email at agrainofsanderson@gmail.com. Or join our Discord. A link is available in our show notes. Thank you so much for listening.
My recording has begun. And I am now using my recording voice.
Very nice.
I'm very fascinated to see how long you can maintain that.
Yes.
Yes. This is my recording voice.
This is my natural
Yes, we're all doing
voice.
radio voices. So I have time.is up. What are we clapping on?
Jesus Christ. God damn it. Now I feel like y'all are just making fun of me because this is just what I sound like. Jack, shut the fuck up. I'm going to punch you. There we go. That's the little giggle that I'm used to.
Can you hear that?
We can.
He's doing the intro song for us.
Oh, wait. Is
All right,
he doing
wait.
the actual...
No, I mean, you have to go, hello and welcome to A Grain of Sanderson.
No. I thought he was doing the Goodnight Kiss, the actual theme that we have.
yeah, he was singing that.
Okay, good.
And then he said...
God, I
said,
hope that
"Hi,
came
my
through on
name's
the actual
Graham."
recording. That would be funny. I'll put that at the end. Also, thank y'all for the gift card. That was very kind of y'all.
Of course. What are you doing?
Graham, I don't remember if you were there when we were talking about this, but Taylor and I were talking about how Maddie and I are no longer the shiny new couple.
I was there.
Yeah,
We
Graham was
moved in.
definitely there.
We moved into old
I
couple
was
territory.
holding you while you told the joke.
I don't know things. I don't remember things. It's my Smedry talent, remember? Anyway, let's... What time?
Let's clap on 41.